All right, so I'll just click on this. Yep. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Vicky and I'm the chair of the Ingham Postdoc Association. Today we've got Associate Professor Lauren Ball, who will be giving us a talk on writing a successful NHMRC investigator grant. Associate Professor Lauren Ball is an advanced accredited practicing dietitian, an NHMRC investigator, and lead of the Healthy Primary Care team at the Griffith University. And she's also the Global Strategy Lead at the NNED Pro Global Center for Nutrition and Health in Cambridge, UK. So I'll let Lauren get started.
Thanks, Vicky, and good morning, or I should say good afternoon, and thank you so much for inviting me, and so great to see that you guys are celebrating Postdoc Appreciation Week, and I think that every week should be Postdoc Appreciation Week, and I really recognise what a challenging phase of career that is, and I really am here today to be as supportive as possible. And as I was saying to Farhana, if you would like to get in touch and stay in touch after today, please feel welcome to. I've popped my Twitter handle on this first slide. Really happy to chat through direct message or email as well, which I can share as well. So I was a postdoc until maybe, gosh, 2.5 years ago. So it gets easier after that stage, I think. And so here I just want to be as supportive as possible. Today I'm hoping to speak for maybe 25 to 30 minutes, and then really happy to have a discussion about anything that's helpful afterwards. And please interrupt me as I go, ask any question you like, either by turning a microphone on or by popping a note in the chat box. I've got the chat box open if you'd like to pop something in there. Before we get underway, I would like to acknowledge the Yuggera, Juggera and Turrbal people, and that's the land in which the campus is on where I am at the moment. That's up here in Brisbane, and I'd like to extend that respect to the lands and the homes that you're listening from, and give a really warm welcome to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander that's amongst us today, as well as more broadly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders past and present. So it's great to see that you've attended today and you have an interest in this topic, and thank you so much for giving up your time to learn more about the Investigator Grant Scheme. I realise that maybe for some people on the line, you may have received great news or not so great news recently, because the most recent round was announced just last week. The embargo lifted, and I put an image of a unicorn here, and it seems to be the reputation of the Investigator Grant Scheme. And that's because they're highly competitive, which creates a sense of prestige, but they're also very generous and flexible. So it funds both a researcher's salary for 5 years and an open pot of money to be spent on research activities, whatever you deem to be most appropriate. I think the only restriction is no airline lounges memberships, can't use it for health insurance, and buying a computer, which is really tough. I run into a lot of issues trying to buy myself a computer. But anyway, other than that, it's a very generous support. So it's the ultimate, really. And it's a great topic for us to be speaking about today. And I know that Ingham and UNSW have many high quality researchers, many who may be on investigator grants, and others who are well and truly worthy of being awarded. So as I said before, I really am here to be supportive and to provide you with confidence that this scheme actually is achievable if your mindset is in the right place. I was fortunate enough to be awarded an investigator grant in the first year that they were offered. That means that I'm in this coming towards the second year of the 5-year fellowship. But before we delve further, I wanted to also share some other experiences I've had with NHMRC, which I think puts me in a good position to share advice and support those of you looking to apply. So the Investigator grant was the second NHMRC fellowship that I've held. The first one was an NHMRC Early Career Fellowship. And so that's like the equivalent of an EL1 in the Investigator grants. And when you accept these fellowships, there's actually a condition that you have to sign on to say that you now will always be a volunteer for NHMRC and serve as a reviewer each year. So as a result, I've been involved for reviewing for NHMRC for many years now. And mostly these are schemes where not only projects are being supported, such as targeted calls, project grants, but also where people are being supported. So postgraduate scholarships, early career fellowships, investigator grants, including the most recent round I was on and the ones that were just announced, and which I know some of you may have submitted to. I've also been a chair for a panel, so for the early career fellowships, which is the EL1, and being a chair is really interesting because NHMRC gives you some additional training and support and mentoring that you then provide to other panel members. So that's a really valuable learning experience when it comes to knowing what the NHMRC is looking for when they decide who to fund in these schemes. Another one of the conditions when you accept these fellowships or grants is the responsibility to help other people. And part of our responsibility is to support the next generation of people in Australia who can create new knowledge and essentially improve the world that we live in. And I think that's the best part of these schemes. It's an exceptional part of the NHMRC system. So what this means is that you're not just taking funds to do research. Once you're a grant holder, you're accepting a responsibility to lift others in their research, to make the whole program better, to really make a difference in Australia. And I think that's a very healthy mindset to have. And I would encourage you to use this mindset and think this way as you consider applying and as you develop an application, not just for investigator grants, but for any grant. Also remember that anyone who has received a grant in the past will have this responsibility as well and would hopefully have this in the front of their minds. So it can be really useful to speak to others that have these grants, ask them to look at your work, speak to you, have a virtual coffee because they've accepted that responsibility. It's their job to help you in your work. And while we're talking about mindset, I'd like to encourage you to reflect on the way that you view these grants. So I've heard lots of people say that grants are won as if it's a prize. I don't think this is a helpful way to think about grants writing. And that's because in my mind, grants aren't won. In the investigator scheme or any scheme, it's not a prize. It's not something that's given as a reward. And I'd hate for someone to think that it's the end of a journey, like it's the ultimate, because it's really not. It's not the end of a pursuit. It's somewhere in the middle. It's not the beginning of your work because you never start from a blank slate. It's a step along the way where an investment is made in you and your work. You then have a responsibility to make a return on that investment. So in my case, I was funded at an EL2 level, and that meant that the amounts that I've been awarded was a little over $1.5 million. So I don't see that as a reward. I don't see that as the end. I feel like now I have a responsibility to show a return on that investment of $1.5 million. So to generate more than that over these next 5 years and not just simply enjoy a prize or enjoy reduced teaching or anything else that some people think are the reason for getting these schemes. Okay, now that I've gotten that off my chest, I just really wanted to say those parts. Let's look at what I want to cover with you today. So I've got 8 short messages that I'd like you to keep in mind when you're thinking about how to best build an investigator grant. Please, as I said, pop something in the chat or just interrupt me if you want to talk about them, and we can have questions at the end too. So let's talk about the first message. Fundamentally, I'd like you to encourage you to think about the purpose of the investigator scheme. So from being a reviewer for a few years now, I've learned that the scheme is only designed to fund research leaders. So the different levels, as I'm sure you know, they're called emerging leaders 1 and 2, and then there's the leadership level. So it means that the program is designed to support people who can lead their own significant program of research, and that becomes their identity as a researcher and their reputation as a researcher. So the research leadership that would be expected would not only span internal leadership, so for you guys at Ingham or elsewhere in close proximity, but also external leadership for journals, organizations, nationally, internationally. And with the movement of research impact, it also means being a really strong advocate in your field for what it would take to actually have impact in this space. So that could involve being proactive with policy, government, healthcare, and really stepping outside what would have traditionally been thought of as research or academic work. And the reason that I'm saying this is because I realize that there's many different ways for academics to enjoy, or researchers to enjoy doing research. They don't all involve research leadership. For me, it's my absolute passion to be a research leader. It's what motivates me to get out of bed in the morning. And I find it the most relaxing part of my day when I have young children. So it gives me headspace. It's part of my identity, and I thrive under the responsibility and the creativity that comes with being a research leader. But for other people, I know that that's not the case, and that's okay. So some researchers enjoy teaching research coursework or conducting research predominantly through honours or PhD students or internships, or being involved in studies opportunistically or across many different topics. For example, they might have a specific method they like to apply lots of different ways. And there's others who simply enjoy research but prefer this to be led by somebody else. And that's all important in the broader scheme of the higher education and research sector, but it's not what the investigator scheme funds. So the scheme's only designed for those who prefer to be leading the research and are wanting to be putting themselves in that position now and into the future. So if that's you, that's great. Let's push on. The second message that I have is to know your research vision. This is still fairly new, I think, for contemporary research, because it's not something you'd typically relate with a scientific method. It's not a very positivist way of describing research, but I would encourage you to think about it in this way. If the people of Australia invested in you, how would you like to give back to them, broadly speaking? How would Australia be a better place in the future from you doing your research? Don't limit yourself to the 5-year period of the grant. Think about your entire career if you stayed in this topic. Think about what you want to be known about upon your retirement or many years when you're no longer on this earth plane. So the 5 years of the investigator grant would just be a stepping stone for what you want to do more broadly. This is the research vision that I put in my proposal right up front. It was the first sentence of the proposal. And I took a long time to carefully craft this vision. And that's because it's a link between the research that I said I would be doing, but also other aspects of my application and what I had done in the past. And it was my attempt to be as authentic as possible about the vision. So your previous research, should fall under this same vision. Your future goals should fall under this same vision. Your leadership should be in this same vision. So, for example, in my application, I included work that I do in the health system through directorships, volunteering, in addition to my research work and publications, to show that I really do have this vision. It's not something I just put together for the sake of sounding good. And the vision should stick with you as well, whether you're successful or not, or whether you even choose to apply or not. I would really encourage you to think about what your vision is. And applying for these fellowships, and there's many I haven't been successful in, but applying has forced me to understand and reflect on my own research vision. It's a really empowering exercise to do. And I have slightly different variations on this same vision that I've put in different applications for different schemes. I've also used this when I've created a research team up here at Griffith, and I've decided on opportunities to say yes to or say no to outside of my work. So I really see it as a worthwhile use of time, because you commit to your vision for a career, not just for a project over the next couple of years or few years. So I'd really encourage you to reflect on your own. If you know what that is, I'd love to hear it. If you want to pop it in the chat box or even share it on Twitter or send me a direct message. I just love hearing about what other people say their vision is and what therefore drives you in your research. Okay, my third message is to check whether you have all of the right stuff. And when I say stuff, there's really 3 different components, and that's what's needed in the eyes of the NHMRC. So firstly, with publications, it's more than just the numbers. While having more can be seen as being more productive, it doesn't support your application if they're in multiple different fields or on different topics or conditions, if there's nothing that brings them together. There needs to be a string that pulls those publications together that aligns with your research vision. So an extra paper just for the sake of it won't help your application. But an extra paper that helps progress or move you forward in your research vision, that will be noticed, that will help your application. Because it says to the reviewer that behind your publication efforts, you are dedicated and committed to some kind of overarching purpose. So again, use your vision to guide your efforts. I've even heard of some people that leave off publications if it detracts from that overall direction and message. Next is impact, and I'm sure you've heard this everywhere now. It's so commonplace. We're all talking about it more and more at universities and institutes, and this focus on what is the point of our research more broadly. And something that's worth remembering for impact is that Anne Kelso, who I'm sure you know, she's the CEO of NHMRC, she led the process of coming up with these new schemes a few years ago now, because she needed to respond to criticism that the NHMRC was only caring about publications and citations rather than the actual contribution that research gives to society. And something I really noticed from watching her talk during the years where these schemes were developed was that she was under pressure, a lot of pressure to show that impact mattered to the research community and that it was important. And she chose the Investigator grant as where researchers need to demonstrate their impact. How you write about impact and provide evidence is almost another story and another talk for another day, because there's lots of thinking that can go into that. But it's the mindset of impact that you need to show to the reviewers, that you get it, you get that you're here to give back to society, not just publish a paper or increase your H index. The rest will follow if your mindset is in the right place. And when you are writing your impact section of your application, you might know that there's 4 different types of impact that you can choose from. So knowledge, social, health, economic, and you might be interested to know that the last 3 years when I've looked at EL1 and EL2 applications as a reviewer, most people, as in more than 9 out of 10 applications, choose knowledge as their impact area. And that's understandable. You might have produced a high quality output that's been cited several times, but just keep in mind that some reviewers could consider this as really an old way of thinking about research, and rather than thinking about the other ways that impact can be generated. And the applications that claim health or economic or social impact, I think they're in a better position to show that they're really working with an impact lens, and I think it'll increase your competitiveness. It'll certainly make you stand out from others. For example, if you have a reviewer with 30 applications and 25 of them have chosen a knowledge impact and only 5 have chosen some of the other areas, it just makes you more memorable. So I would encourage you to have a think about whether any of those 3 areas of impact could relate to your work. Finally, it's important that you're able to articulate your experience as a research leader. And it really shows your opportunity for the future, particularly when we talk about relative to opportunity. And my biggest tip for doing this well is to not merely write down the roles you're on, for example, being on a research committee or being an associate editor for a journal. That's not enough, but you can make it really stand out by thinking about the contribution you're making by being in those roles. So it's a slight twist on that. So what did you make possible that wasn't previously possible? Or what are you adding that a robot in that role wouldn't be able to add? That is the benefit that you're bringing to the research sector. That is your leadership. So not just holding a service or leadership role, but what beyond that? Where are you showing the value? And this is how you show the return on investment that will come from you being awarded an investigator grant. The next message is about your narrative as a researcher. And I think this can be done in 2 ways. Reflecting on what I wrote in my application, one of the contributing factors I think worked well is that I spoke about my progress as a PhD student and then as a postdoc, and the investment that was made in me, not only grant-wise, but just in terms of leadership positions, as we spoke about in the previous slide, and just what that return on investment had been and what I was able to give back, which was far greater than what would have been like-for-like comparison of an investment, and how I've benefited stakeholders who have worked with me. And then I was able to make the case that further investment at this next level of fellowship would bring about further return and further benefits to Australia. That's essentially how I tried to pitch the vibe of the application. And I think another contributing factor was that I pitched an entire program of work that will be done over 5 years, rather than focusing on, say, a single RCT or even a series of discrete studies that would happen one after another. And you've probably noticed by now that even now I'm not talking about discrete research studies because I don't think that's what's going to get you an investigator grant. The applications are all such high quality that the scores are not made on really specific details relating to scientific quality or sample size estimation or which stats you're going to use. It's about that broader direction and that broader vision. So think about that narrative that you want to present, and it could involve describing your origins, your previous work, your successes to date, and your proposed work for the next 5 years, and how this all fits together and aligns with your vision. So that's a hell of a lot of information to put in the page limits. So you won't be writing at the detail, like I said, about sample size. You will be writing a big picture document. The next message is about tapping into the research environment that you have. And I was really proud to list Griffith as my host institution because it's definitely given me an advantage in my application. You should be making it your business to clearly understand and articulate the support that you have. If Ingham is where you're going to be for your investigator grant, if it's somewhere else, you need to know what support will come. And as a reviewer, I'm constantly surprised at the number of applications that don't mention anything about their environment and what support they have. And it makes you wonder whether an applicant has had a discussion with their line manager or the director or their head of school or supervisor, whoever it might be, and what would actually happen if you were successful. How would it impact them? Because there is a contribution and investment that does come from your research environment. Very few institutions or institutes offer to pay any difference in salary amounts the way that my host institution did, or they don't necessarily provide support for infrastructure or other research services. Or maybe they do and it just never made its way into the application. So you can't score what's not written down. Maybe it's commonplace, so you don't even think to write it down when you can't make those assumptions. So I would really encourage you to ask upwards. Ask whoever you need to ask what the expected support would be for someone in your position. This is not being rude, this is just finding out more information. Or ask to be introduced to other people who are in your institute, in your environment, who can talk about their experiences or can mentor you through the process. Or even whether there's examples of successful applications that you can read and you might need to sign a confidentiality statement. It might already be available to you and you're just not aware of it. If you have some funky piece of technology or equipment and you're writing that into the application, write it in that this is a contribution from your research environment. Maybe your institute allows you to hire a staff member, or maybe they give you a PhD scholarship. Whatever it is, you should write it in because that's important contribution. It shows that your institute values you as a researcher. Whether it's your desk space, your computer, any kind of professional development allowance, anything like that, again, I'd encourage you to get it in there. A big challenge is to some people sit back and expect that support just to come or just to be known, when I've never heard of that happening at all. So if you don't ask, you won't know about it. And if you don't know about it, you can't write about it. And if you don't write about it, the reviewer won't know about it. So preparation is really about you asking questions early. And I've heard really great things about Ingham. I've heard great things about UNSW. I'm sure there's good support that's there. Just make sure it gets in the application. Okay, moving on. I feel like a talk about the investigator scheme or any scheme wouldn't be complete without mentioning resilience. It's like the big fad word of 2021, isn't it? Or in research. So the reality is that the likelihood of succeeding in these schemes is low. I think the success rate this year was 13% on average, maybe slightly different at the different EL1, EL2 and leadership levels, and less likely if you're a female as well, which is absolutely unacceptable. But have a think about from the reviewer's perspective. So reading these applications, it's not like marking assignments. It's not like reviewing journal articles. Like there's no applications that come in that you can easily push to the sides. All applications are from really high quality researchers proposing high quality work. In my mind, more than 95% of the applications I read, I personally think are fundable and are worthwhile doing. If only we had the money in the system, and I would really encourage you to really help advocate about more money in the system. That's what's going to see a change in this space. It's not a case of someone's work being unacceptable and trying to make it acceptable. That's not the game that we're playing here. We need more money to share around, and these applications are pretty much all worthwhile to fund. So you might apply and you might not get it. But going through the process makes you a better researcher, and it's a wonderful outcome in itself. And it might mean that you recycle your ideas for another scheme or another funding opportunity or another job. You'll still use the effort that you put into your application. It wouldn't be competitive if there wasn't value in going through the process. And just to show you that I know what it's like to apply for grants and fellowships and not getting them, here's just some of the ones that I even still have a record of. These are some of the applications that I've applied for over the past 5 years and haven't gotten. So when this happens to me, I mean, the last one was only last week, I give myself 24 hours to be disappointed. 24 hours I'm allowed to eat chocolate and think about other career options, and my family tolerates that only for 24 hours, and then I stop caring about it and I remember my vision and I move on to whatever I have on my plate next. There's always other opportunities. So let's keep moving on now and talk about timelines. And I'm often asked, when is the best time to start on your application? And I think it's a really good question because there's a lot of steps involved, and the Sapphire system is big and onerous, and there's a lot to put your paperwork together. So my answer would be 12 months. Give yourself 12 months to get your application together. So now is a really good time to be thinking about next year's scheme. So good on you for turning up today and thinking about it even now. But really, your preparation doesn't start with opening up a Word document. Your preparation starts with your mindset and the decisions you make now about how you invest your time. So for example, you might take between now and Christmas time to draft up your own research vision, share it with your peers, your supervisor, get feedback on that. You might even interview other people who have been successful and ask them about what they said their vision was, what their projects were. Then you might want to start tweaking some of the projects you're on, even how you write about them, the titles you give them on a paper. You might have a synonym for some of your words that you want to align with the NHMRC funding guidelines or the priorities they have. You might want to workshop these as a group, and this is all before you've started writing out some kind of proposal. You might want to seek feedback on which ways you can write the same vision that best shows your authenticity or shows your commitment to research. And if you document your steps along the way, your application will start to really write itself. So thinking and talking about it, I think, is half the battle, rather than actually putting pen to paper on your Word document. And that really leads me to my final message I have about the scheme, which is that you are not alone in this. It might feel a bit daunting. You're the only, you're CIA on this application, but preparing your application is not something you should be doing alone in your office or at home. In lockdown doesn't help this, but you shouldn't be thinking about this as time away with your door shut. Your application will be best crafted by getting involved in the research community, talking about who you are as a researcher and what resonates with other people. So being a part of your institute, bringing it up at your next performance review or talking with your supervisor, making it really clear that you'd like to apply and you're looking for any help available. You might want to ask around whether there's writing workshops that are available, or project pitching sessions, or a mentoring scheme, or anything at all that you can use as your preparation for next year's round, or whenever, another year, or any other scheme. You might want to ask your Office for Research if they have exemplars that you can look at, as I mentioned before. And not only reach out to people at Ingham, think about people outside your institute, your university as well. When I was preparing my application, because it was the first round, there were no exemplars available because the scheme hadn't run before. But I didn't let that stop me. I knew that the people on the panels would be previous recipients of equivalent fellowships under the old schemes. So I looked on the NHMRC website, I looked up who the previous successful recipients were. So back in the day, EL2 investigator grants would be like a career development fellowship was the name of the old scheme. So I just chose 5 people that had a similar sort of like applied health topic that wasn't known to me, completely new, and I just wrote to them and asked them if I could have a virtual coffee with them, or if they wouldn't mind casting their eyes on my application and give me any tips or pointers or anything that's unclear. And 3 of the 5 people said yes, 2 of them didn't respond, and I didn't mind about that because I had 3 people willing to look at this, and it was a huge help because it's straight out of the mouths of your potential review panel. And then they put you down as a conflict if they're asked to review your work, of course. But those people, and myself included, we're at your service just as much as we're at the service to the Australian taxpayers. So I really do encourage you to put yourself out there. You might find that it works. So thank you. I just wanted to finish with a little plug for my own research team at Griffith called Healthy Primary Care. That team is funded through my current investigator grant, and it's really rewarding to be leading this team with this support and really making a difference in people's lives that I can already see, even though I'm just shy of 2 years into the fellowship. So Vicky, thanks again for inviting me. I hope this information has been helpful. I'm really happy to answer any questions and to keep talking.
Thank you so much, Lauren. This is amazing. Really good tips and lots to learn from, especially, you know, reaching out to potential reviewers. I guess, yeah, past successful applicants. So I'll just open up if anyone has any questions that you want to ask Lauren. Amy, see your hands up.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Hi, thanks, Lauren. That was really interesting. So I've been applying for the investigator grant. I've had 2 goes at EL2, and I'm much more in a basic science kind of area. So I've kind of come from the ARC model, and I feel like I'm intruding in on the medical side with my applications, but I've generally gotten some pretty good feedback. I guess one of the things that people probably ask questions a lot is when you're coming from more of this basic science side, demonstrating impact is sometimes really tricky because I don't have clinical trials, I don't have patents, I don't kind of have direct influence on people. So that's often, sometimes I get the feedback is, you know, a little bit more demonstration of impact, you know, beyond just this paper was really good and it, you know, that was used in this and that and this. And my other question is, as someone who's in that EL2 category, a lot of the feedback I got was really great leadership, and I had a high score for that, but then, oh, you don't have enough senior author papers and things like that. And so it's, yeah, so I guess mainly the first one though I have is my question from your experience in reviewing grants as well.
Yeah, just on that second point, that's really frustrating. Really great leadership, but I guess leadership comes in many forms. Yeah, it's funny what some people say, that feedback, you know, senior author papers would be seen as some of the best forms of leadership that you can demonstrate. So yeah, that's a bit frustrating.
I mean, that's easy to know what to work on.
Yeah. Yeah. Your first point around basic sciences, I totally can see how challenging it is to show you've got an impact mindset when you're just a little bit further away, you know, from the bedside or community or however you might like to phrase it. But I do think you have an opportunity to stand out from other basic scientists by actually not doing too much extra work. So for example, things that strategies I've seen work really well, for example, having a community advisory panel. You might have like 2 or 3 community members that you chat with every quarter or year, whatever it is, to really show how your work fits with their lives, get feedback from them on the direction of your work. Even if it seems like a long bow, just being able to show that connection would set you apart really well. Another approach is if you mapped out, like if you do your basic science work and that leads to this new knowledge and that leads to who would be doing those trials? Are there other researchers at your uni or elsewhere around Australia, showing you have connections to them, like you have a knowledge, I don't know, like a pathway or funnel, or you have something in place where you are connecting to the next group along the chain who might do the next phase of trials, for example. That will also show that mind. It's really the mindset that I think you need to get down on paper rather than outputs when it comes to
yeah, because I definitely, when I write, I try to do the whole, demonstrate, like, not just saying, oh, I'm on this panel, I'm doing that, but what it's led to. And sometimes I'm like, it hasn't led to anything yet.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Lauren.
Thanks, Amy.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Comments? So I might ask something, Lauren, in regards to track record. I guess it's the frustrating bit is that, we're starting out and putting an investigator grant, and then some of the comment is that you don't have, enough grants, a previous track record in grants submissions, even though I've got a couple of, seed grants to get started on that. I don't know how you get away with that.
Well, Vicky, grant income, my knowledge is that grant income is not part of the scoring for any section of investigator grants. So you might, if you've got some massive grant, you might weave it into impact or leadership section, but it's not part of what you're assessed on. So your money in is not going to, like, not having money in doesn't mean that you're missing some part of your application. I think the more practice you can have in grant writing, the more you're able to sell that pitch or that idea, that pitch of investment. But I didn't put any of my money coming in. I didn't have a lot when I applied. I didn't put that in my application at all. And you think about, what does money into you mean? It means that someone, whether it's an internal seed grant, whether it's government or philanthropy, whoever, it means someone has seen value in you and your work, and they've handed over money. Essentially, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about grants. So you can write about that in many different ways. And there are many other ways to show that you are a valued researcher in the eyes of other people that may not involve money. It may be some of your service leadership roles that you have, or it might be as a supervisor, an advisor, or on something. I wouldn't let the money side hold you back at all.
Okay.
It's very different, Vicky, if you're talking about like CTCS scheme, the clinical trials, or like another NHMRC scheme where you have like a 2-page free text CV that's often included, and that's a different game. It's a different ballpark.
Is that easier to get funding
in those other schemes?
Yeah.
Oh, based on the success rate, no, not at all. But I think those schemes where you've got an idea, look at ideas grants, example, you've got ideas and then you show who your team are, and the way that the track record is assessed is just an open 2-page CV, then naturally the ones who can write that they've pulled in X million dollars come across stronger. But the way Investigator grant scheme is that money is I haven't seen it unless it's going to be updated in the next version. Money shouldn't be a worry. It's not about that.
Okay.
Natalie's got her hand up. You're just on mute, Natalie.
There we go. I'm here now. You spoke a little bit about institutional support, and I wondered if you could just provide some more comments on ways that we might be able to negotiate with getting some institutional support that would strengthen the application, or if there's anything that you did to get that support.
Yes. Well, I was very blunt, and Natalie, some people might say that this is where gender differences come in. You know, that sometimes females are less comfortable asking this. I just don't care about that anymore. And so I said things to our research institute director, for example, as would you like me to put in an application this year? I need to show institutional support. Is there anything that's standard that I would run in there? That's essentially it. And then for whoever it is that you would ask that question to, and it might be multiple people. I think I actually sent the same email to 3 or 4 people, just at different pockets of my university. And it's not a good look for anyone to come back with, oh no, Natalie, there's nothing for you. Like, I don't think people are really going to say that. And so I know we have a standard, like for decorers, there's a standard 20K cash support that comes. That was not the case for NHMRC. So I just asked for that to be replicated for still Cat 1 funding. Can I put that in? And the salary gap is also different because I was in an existing role, and there was like it wasn't a lot of money. It was maybe 10K a year, or maybe even less than that, difference in what would be funded and what my role pay level was. I asked for that to be matched, or I think maybe someone just said we would match that. We have a policy that will be matched. And that's what I put in there. But I also spoke about stuff that would seem commonplace, but doesn't get written about. So library workshops, space on campus, space for PhD students, phone, printing, internet, all that sort of stuff. I put that all in.
Okay, thanks.
Hope that's helpful.
Yeah. Yes, I think it's different depending on your institution as to what space is available for PhD students and things like that.
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, it depends like the way that you ask it. Like, would you like this to happen or not? Is generally what I've found worthwhile. But it's very different depending on who you're asking, etc. But you have to ask the question.
Okay, thank you.
There's a question in the chat box, Lauren.
Yeah, great question, Amit. So Amit's asking, how are people with 100% research and 40% research objectively compared by a panel? Yes, so Amit, at the beginning of the application, this is something that was added in, not the round that I was on, but more recently than this. So there's a question about relative to opportunity, where if you are on a 40% research profile or whatever it might be, you would put it in there. And
yes, yeah. Thanks, Lauren. I'm aware. You know,
cool.
I received an early career fellowship as well before,
awesome.
but then applied for an EL2. This was my 3rd time that I was applying. It was again unsuccessful. And now I'm in a traditional academic role with 40% research.
Yeah.
Now, although I do have, you know, close to 100 papers, lots of demonstrated impact and grant money and thing, it becomes, and you know, there is the goalposts from the feedback that I've received kept changing. In every feedback that I've received, you know, the panel says, oh, there are not enough publications. And I wonder sort of thing, you know, someone who's in a 40% research workload, I already have close to 100 papers. What more can I do? than that.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, this time around, my scores increased, but they were still not at that level where it was fundable. So it was a near miss. And I took the feedback from the previous sessions and improved my application in this round. But the scoring for my research proposal actually decreased this time around. So it's a bit of a conundrum that, you know, what do you take, what do you receive sort of thing. And it's very subjective in a way because there's no grant review panel. They're just 5 reviewers who are reviewing it sort of thing.
Yes, and I'm sure like if you did the same application 5 years in a row, I'm sure there's some kind of standard variability that would happen based on the differences of reviewers. Yeah, I mean, that's really frustrating. I empathize with that. In terms of the 40% acknowledgement, there's obviously, you know, the career relative to opportunity, there's the career disruption section, and then there's another bit about context of your career. It's a heading, something like that, which is also a new addition. So you can weave that in there. Some people I've seen have spoken about the impact they bring about through teaching. So depending on how you can weave your teaching work as relevant to your vision or crafting your vision around the other roles you have, not just thinking that the career you want to have, you're only doing in 40% of the time and this other 60% you're just doing irrelevant work. I wouldn't think about your teaching as irrelevant. You are improving Australia's society through that. So having a think about whether you can bring that together, if possible, could be something to think about. And I mean, I was talking to, before I applied, I was talking to a very, very well respected researcher in my field of dietetics. And she said that she applied for the Career Development Fellowship, so the equivalent of EL2 back in the day. She applied 5 years in a row and got it on the 5th year. And she said that each year she just hated put it in the application, hated it, and got it on the 5th year. So I would never give up. You're clearly very close.
Yeah, let's say sort of thing. So yeah. At least the drafts are ready. So, you know, you don't really have to. So you don't have to start from scratch.
Yeah.
Sort of thing, which is at least a positive thing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amit.
Any other questions? In that case, we'll wrap it up. So Lauren, thank you so much again for taking your time to talk to us about this. And hopefully some of us will reach out to you and see, you know, if we can get any other tips from you. But yes, I've certainly learned a lot today. So that's very, very useful. Thank you so much, Lauren.
Thanks, Vicky. Nice to see you all.
Thank you.
See you later. Bye.
See ya.